Hi, I'm Rowena. My sister mocked me for spending my last $940 on a house no one wanted. They said it was a joke, a breakdown, a lost cause. But the truth? That abandoned house had more of my father in it than our family estate ever did. Inside, I found his will. The real one. The one Valora buried. They cut me out of photos, out of bank accounts, out of memory. But the worst part? They almost made me believe I deserved it. What else have they hidden from me? The county auction hall smelled like dust and burnt coffee. I sat in the far back corner, clutching an envelope with exactly $940 in cash. It was all I had. Not all I owned. No, this was everything left after rent, groceries, and a series of job rejections that made my confidence bleed out day by day. People around me looked polished, sharp, prepared. I looked like someone who shouldn't be there. But I was. The bidding started. Lot 47. One abandoned residential property. No guarantees. Starting bid, $700. A few heads turned, but most ignored it. I raised my hand. 700 from the back. The auctioneer called. Do I hear 8? Silence. Going once, going twice. 800, someone said, barely audible, not even looking up from their phone. My fingers trembled. 900. A pause. The guy glanced at me, shook his head. The gavel slammed. Sold for $900. The room moved on. I didn't. I was still gripping the envelope, now empty. The silence inside me cracked when my phone buzzed. It was Valora, a video. She stood in front of my new purchase, the house I hadn't even seen up close yet, fake crying and laughing as she announced, "My sister just spent $940 on a haunted doghouse. She's officially unwell. Thoughts and prayers." 300 likes. Comments ranged from classic Rowena to some people never learn. I tucked the phone away without responding. I wasn't surprised. But surprise isn't what hurts. What hurts is realizing you still hoped this time would be different. 2 days earlier, we'd gathered for Mom's birthday. Everyone was there. Valora, her husband, my younger brother Dean, and even Aunt Marla, who usually skipped events unless there was free wine. Valora stood up halfway through dinner, holding a cake box. "Now this," she said, placing it in front of Mom with a flourish, "is for our family's newest real estate mogul." The frosting image on the cake was a high-res printout of the house I'd just bid on. The windows were shattered. One shutter hung sideways. The text? "Happy mental breakdown, Rowena." They laughed. My brother choked on his wine, nearly spilling it. Mom shook her head but smiled. No one said a word to stop it. I stared at that cake, the plastic knife in my hand, and thought, not about throwing it, not about crying, but about the silence. The complicit, comfortable silence that made cruelty feel like tradition. Later that night, I drove alone. The road out toward the property twisted through farmland and leafless trees. It was late autumn, the kind that turns everything gold just before it goes gray. When you're the youngest in a family like mine, you're not the baby. You're the decoy, the buffer, the one they laugh at to avoid laughing at themselves. I used to think it was just teasing. Then I grew up and realized it was pattern. Eleanor Roosevelt once said, "No one can make you feel inferior without your consent." She never met my family. In mine, it's not about consent. It's about conditioning. I pulled up to the address the next morning. The mailbox read Shipley in faded letters. The paint was flaking like the house was shedding its own past. Vines had overtaken one side, like nature itself wanted to erase it. I sat in the car longer than I should have, half expecting Valora to pull up and live-stream my reaction, half wishing someone would. The key turned in the lock after 3 tries. The door creaked open like it didn't believe me. Inside, the air was thick, like time had stopped and gotten stale. Dust covered everything. Light filtered through cracked windows, illuminating cobwebs, warped floorboards, and a broken lamp still plugged into nothing. The house wasn't haunted. It was forgotten. And somehow, that felt worse. I walked through the kitchen. Rusted tools. A toaster that had surrendered to mold. cabinets hanging slightly open, like they were mid-sentence when abandoned. I touched the edge of the counter and whispered, "This is mine." Not because anyone gave it to me, not because I earned it, but because no one else wanted it, and that meant no one else could take it. In the back room, I stepped on something soft. The floorboard dipped. Curious, I pried it up. Beneath was a dusty frame wrapped in a piece of flannel. I unfolded it. It was a photograph. My father. And me. I was maybe 6, standing in front of this very house, smiling, hair messy, shoelaces untied. He was holding my hand. And the house behind us? It looked whole. I blinked. I had no memory of this. I turned the photo over. Something was scrawled in pen, faint but still legible. And then I noticed his handwriting on the back. The handwriting was unmistakable, looped but steady, slightly right-leaning, like it had been written with purpose, not emotion. On the back of that old photo, in black ink that had faded but refused to vanish, were the words, "One day, when you're ready, come back here." I sat cross-legged on the dusty floor, holding it like it was a piece of him. My dad. Not the version Valora turned him into during her speeches or charity events, but the man who used to fix broken radios just because he liked the silence of concentrating. This message, it wasn't about nostalgia. It felt like a breadcrumb. One he left, knowing I'd follow it only if I was desperate enough to listen for the first time. The afternoon light had shifted through the cracked windows, casting long shadows on the warped hardwood floors. I picked myself up, brushed my jeans off, and started moving deeper into the house. Each step creaked like it was reacting to my presence, like the place was waking up after years of being ignored. The back office still had a roll-top desk, half covered in moldy newspapers and dust-thick air. The top drawer was locked. I didn't hesitate. I went to the kitchen, found a rusted pry bar left by whoever used to live, or hide, here, and cracked the drawer open. It groaned like it didn't want to give it up. Inside, I found an envelope, faded, sealed. My name written in the same handwriting. Rowena! My full name. Not Row or Kid or Hey You. My hands shook a little as I opened it. The letter inside was dated 8 months before his stroke. 8 months before Valora announced she'd take care of the estate, before I was told I'd already received enough, though I couldn't remember what enough was ever supposed to look like. His words weren't flowery. They were careful. He wrote about regretting how things fell apart between me and the rest of the family. About Valora stepping in too quickly, pushing everyone into silence. He said he'd been pressured to update documents, legalize decisions that he didn't believe in but was too tired to argue over. He mentioned uncomfortable conversations with Valora's attorney and how he feared the documents no longer reflected his wishes. And then the line that hit like a slap. If anything ever happens to me, know this. Some signatures are not mine. I reread that line until it blurred. Not out of emotion, out of rage. I folded the letter slowly, stood, and walked to the kitchen window. The glass was filthy, but I could still see the sky. I remembered the last real conversation I had with him. He was sitting on the porch in a sweater Valora hated, holding a mug of tea no one ever asked if he wanted. "You know what's worse than being forgotten?" he'd asked me, out of nowhere. "Being remembered for something you never did." I didn't know what he meant back then. I nodded, mumbled something about being late, and left. Now I understood. He had warned me. He had seen it coming. "Silence doesn't always mean you're wrong," he told me that day. "Sometimes, it's how you buy time to hit back right." I walked back to the office. My legs felt heavier, not weak, grounded, focused. This house wasn't haunted. It wasn't abandoned. It was a vault. And I'd just found the combination. I went back to the drawer, pulled it out entirely, and tilted it. A false bottom shifted. Behind it, folded and slightly torn, was a legal document. Thick paper, embossed with a faded seal. I unfolded it slowly. An earlier version of the will. I scanned the allocations. My name, my full name was there. Not as a footnote, as an heir. The house, the storage unit, a share of the foundation. Everything that had since been claimed under Valora's name wasn't supposed to be. My breath caught when I touched the bottom corner of the last page. And guess what? This one still had his fingerprints on it. I went back to the house that morning, but this time I wasn't looking for ghosts. I was looking for proof of what I'd suspected for years, but had never dared to say out loud. The difference now? I didn't care who it hurt. The walls weren't just covered in dust. They were covered in memories I'd been systematically cropped out of. I walked into what used to be the den. An old gallery wall lined with family photographs ran the length of the hallway. Some were yellowed, others clearly reprinted in color. And in all of them, every single one, I was either turned away, cut off at the shoulder, or missing entirely. One photo of Dad and Valora at her graduation party had a small frame next to it. The plaque said, "Family Pride." I remember being there. I bought that cake. But the image on the wall told a different story. You don't realize how long you've been erased until you stop trying to show up. It triggered a memory. Christmas Eve, maybe 12 years ago. The whole family had gathered at the estate for the annual holiday dinner. I'd offered to take the photo, like always. When I stepped forward to join them after setting the timer, Valora said, "You'll just blur the frame, Ro. Sit this one out." At the time, I thought it was a joke. I laughed. They laughed. And the camera clicked without me. I shrugged it off, but something inside me twisted. I never mentioned it. Now, that same photo was hanging in this house, proud and pristine, with no trace of me. It wasn't an oversight, it was tradition. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just stood there long enough for the house to settle around me, like it agreed. Then I changed into something clean and got in the car. I didn't call ahead. I didn't need to. The estate gates were open, and Valora's shiny black SUV was parked at its usual angle, right where Dad used to warn us not to block the fire lane. Some things never changed. I rang the doorbell. Valora opened the door with a curated smile. "Rowena," she said, drawing out the name like a sour note. "This is a surprise." I stepped in without asking. "We need to talk." She blinked, stepped back. "Well, I've got a lunch in an hour, but—" I cut her off. "I found the will, the original, with his signature and the notarized seal." Her smile cracked, just for a second. "You found an old draft. That was never filed. You know Dad liked to write things out longhand before going through the proper channels. Don't patronize me, Valora." "I'm not. But let's not dig up the past, especially over a piece of paper you barely understand." I held her gaze. "He left me the house. He mentioned storage, too. His exact words were, 'Some signatures are not mine. You want to dig? I've got a shovel.'" She didn't answer, just motioned toward the living room. "Why don't you sit?" I stayed standing. While she walked off to grab something from the kitchen, I scanned the room. It had been remodeled, brighter colors, new furniture, but the big family portrait still hung over the fireplace. I stared at it. Something looked wrong. I stepped closer. My face, my supposed face in the second row, looked off, like it had been digitally inserted. I leaned in. A small crack ran through the glass, just wide enough to see a sliver beneath the glossy photo. I peeled back the corner. There, under the new layer, was the original. And I was there, wearing a different dress, standing between Dad and Dean. The pose was identical, but the girl in the front had been replaced. Not removed. Replaced. They didn't delete me. They just replaced me, with the version of me they wished they had. I snapped a picture on my phone and walked out. She didn't follow me. Maybe she knew I'd seen enough. Maybe she thought she still had time to spin it. Back at the house, the anger burned off slowly, like fog lifting. I didn't cry. I didn't drink. I didn't call anyone. I went to the den, pulled out the folder I'd found the day before, and started organizing. They tried to write me out, rewrite me. But I wasn't the disappointment. I was the deviation from their control. And now, I was going to correct the record. While sorting papers in the living room, I noticed a warped panel on the far wall. It popped loose with just a little pressure. Behind it was a narrow cavity wrapped in cloth. I reached in and pulled out an envelope, stiff, aged, with an embossed stamp. Inside was a certified copy of the original will. This wasn't just signed, it was notarized. Legally, they were screwed. I read the will 3 times before I let myself believe it was real. Not just the signature, my father's name curved in that deliberate slant I'd know anywhere, but the notary stamp, the seal, the date. Everything about it screamed authenticity, and yet it had never seen the inside of a courthouse file. That kind of omission doesn't happen by accident. They didn't just try to erase me emotionally, they tried to delete me legally. The next morning, I drove into town. I hadn't set foot in the records office in over a decade, not since the day I filed my name off the family's shared trust after Valora's restructuring. The clerk on duty was a woman in her 60s, thin and precise, with readers perched on her nose, and a mouth set in a line that said, she didn't waste time on nonsense. I handed her the document. I need to know if this version of my father's will was ever filed with the county. She studied it for a long moment, then typed into her terminal. Her brows furrowed. We have a version filed, yes, but the date's off. It's from 4 months later, and it doesn't match this one. Who submitted it? She clicked. Valora Dunn, on behalf of the family estate. I didn't flinch. I just asked for a certified copy. She nodded, and a few minutes later, I walked out with a printout confirming what I already knew in my bones. Valora buried the real will and replaced it with one she helped design. Back at the house, I kicked off my shoes by the front door and walked the hall barefoot. The floor creaked differently now, like it was starting to trust me, like it knew I was there to uncover, not forget. I remembered a panel behind the hallway closet that didn't sit flush with the wall. I grabbed a flathead screwdriver from the kitchen and pried it loose. Behind the panel, wrapped in a plastic freezer bag taped shut with electrical tape, was a phone. Old. Thick. Nokia. My dad's. I took it to the kitchen, dug through my boxes for the universal charger I'd kept out of habit, and plugged it in. After a few seconds, the screen flickered on with that clunky greenish glow. I opened the messages folder. There were no sent texts, but the drafts folder had 3 entries. One read, "Don't trust the new version. I only signed the one I gave to R." The timestamp was 2 days before his stroke. I sat down hard in the old breakfast nook chair. The plastic cracked beneath me. I didn't move. This wasn't an accident. The knock came an hour later. Valora stood at the door like a realtor surveying a fixer-upper, dressed in tailored beige, sunglasses still on. She stepped in without asking. "This obsession," she said, "will ruin whatever dignity you think you have left." I didn't bother to answer right away. I walked into the kitchen, made tea, and left the kettle screaming while I stared her down. "Funny," I said finally. "I was thinking the same thing about you." Her jaw tightened. "You don't know what you're walking into. You don't know what I already found." She gave me a look I'd seen too many times growing up, the one that said, "Poor little Rowena, always a few steps behind." Except this time, she wasn't the one in control. I was. She left without another word, but I watched her go from the kitchen window, hand trembling just slightly, when she unlocked her car. That night, I opened a new spiral notebook and wrote a timeline. Everything I discovered, who had access to what, the inconsistencies. I started mapping out a legal argument, not just an emotional one. Valora hadn't stumbled into this. She'd built it. This wasn't just theft. This was a surgical erasure. She'd manipulated legal channels, social perception, and even the family's own shared memories. It was deeper than I thought. She hadn't just wanted more. She'd wanted me to disappear completely. And it almost worked. I was texting a contact from a law school friend's office when the message came through. No number, just words. Back off before you end up buried in that house, too. I stared at it for a full minute. Then I hit save, screenshot, and sent it to Callan Brewster, the only attorney I ever trusted. Some people think threats work because they inspire fear. They forget. Sometimes threats just light the fuse. The text had shaken me more than I wanted to admit, but it didn't paralyze me. That night, I couldn't sleep, not out of fear, but clarity. People like Valora didn't bluff. They manipulated, maneuvered, buried truths under piles of polished family photo albums and eloquent eulogies. But fear only works on the people who think they're alone. I wasn't. The next morning, I called the one person I knew wouldn't be scared off by a notary stamp or a veiled threat. Callan Brewster answered on the third ring. "Rowena?" he asked, his voice still rough from sleep. "It's time," I said. "I have something you need to see." He didn't ask for details, just gave me a time and said, "Bring everything." We met outside the courthouse. Callan looked like he always did, slightly underdressed but alert, carrying that quiet confidence that had gotten him blacklisted from Valora's network years ago. He'd questioned the wrong clause in a property deal and vanished from every family contact list the next week. I handed him the copy of the original will, the one I'd found hidden behind the wall panel. He read it silently, flipping each page with slow, deliberate fingers. When he got to the notarized page, he let out a low whistle. "They didn't just forge a document," he said. "They buried the real one." We walked into the records division together. The clerk behind the counter, a woman with gray hair pulled tight into a bun and reading glasses that looked like they belonged in a courtroom drama, took one look at the document and pursed her lips. "This version was never filed," she said after a few moments of checking. "But we have a will on record, submitted months later." Callan leaned forward. "Filed by whom?" "Valora Dunn." "Of course." The clerk hesitated, then printed 2 copies, one of Valora's filed version and one of a scan from the county archives that matched mine. She didn't say it aloud, but her eyes lingered on me. Sometimes women like us recognize each other not by face, but by what we've had to swallow. As we left the office, Callan said, "This is real. You know that, right? We could take this to court, not just for inheritance, but for fraud." I nodded, but my mind had already gone somewhere else. Darla, our old housekeeper, who practically raised me when my mom was too busy playing golf and Valora was too busy playing Daughter of the Year. I remembered hearing her voice one night when I was supposed to be asleep. "He said it belongs to Rowena," she'd whispered to someone, maybe my uncle. "The oak desk, she gets the house." At the time, I hadn't thought much of it. But now it hit like a thunderclap. Later that afternoon, I drove across town to Darla's apartment complex. It hadn't changed. Same sagging awnings, same smell of over-fertilized lawns. Her name was still on the mailbox. She opened the door with cautious eyes. "Sweetheart," she said softly, "you look tired." I stepped inside. "Do you have a minute?" She hesitated, then nodded. "You should know, I've been expecting this." We sat in her tiny kitchen. I showed her the photo of the will, then the text message. Her lips tightened. "Valora came to me after the funeral," she said. "Said I'd be helping the family by staying out of it. She left a check on the table, $20,000. Did you cash it?" "No, but I didn't tear it up either." She stood, went to the cabinet above her stove, and returned with a small cassette recorder. "Your father gave me this the week before his stroke. Told me not to play it unless you came asking for the truth." I took the recorder with trembling fingers. It felt heavier than it should have. Back at my place, Callan and I sat in the living room while the tape spun. My father's voice came through, tired but steady. "If this gets buried too," he said, "I hope someone who loves her enough will make it right." It wasn't just a message. It was a torch being passed. I stared out the window, into the dull gray afternoon light, fists tightening around the recorder. And suddenly, I wasn't fighting for just me anymore. I woke at 2:43 a.m. to the sharp scent of smoke. It wasn't the comforting kind, like winter logs or burnt toast. It was chemical, cold, calculated. The air in my throat turned metallic as I shot out of bed, barefoot, heart hammering, and ran toward the back door. Flames curled along the threshold, small, controlled, licking at the wooden frame as if to say, "We can take this further." I grabbed the fire extinguisher I'd unpacked just hours earlier and smothered the blaze. The silence that followed was worse than the crackling. It wasn't a warning, it was an invitation. The fire department arrived 20 minutes later. One of the responders, a kid who couldn't have been older than my niece, nodded politely and took a few notes. "There's definite accelerant residue," he said. "Gasoline. Could be some bored kids pulling a prank." "Kids usually don't aim for the hinge of the door," I replied, arms crossed. A police officer jotted something down lazily. "You sure you didn't leave something burning inside, ma'am? Sometimes stress makes folks overlook the obvious." I stared at him for a long second. "You know what's more dangerous than paranoia? History repeating itself while everyone pretends not to see it." He gave a tight nod and walked away. By morning, the ash had settled, but online, the fire was just starting. Valora had posted a photo on Instagram, a black and white shot of our father's funeral. The caption read, "Some people mourn by moving forward. Others unravel, sad." The comments underneath were poison. Anonymous accounts speculating about my mental decline, links to a now viral Reddit thread calling me unstable, obsessed, and delusional. Someone had even uploaded a screenshot of a confidential evaluation I'd had in college after my first panic attack, marked sensitive, now paraded like a punchline. They didn't just want my name off the deed, they wanted it off the map. By noon, Callan had had enough. He called it what it was, a coordinated smear campaign. "This isn't family dysfunction anymore," he said, pacing in my kitchen. "This is defamation, intimidation, and malicious abuse of private health data." We filed for a restraining order that afternoon. I uploaded every document, every will variation, every recorded call and image to 3 different encrypted cloud drives. One linked to a private email set to forward everything to a journalist if anything happened to me. Fear wasn't the goal. Readiness was. While cleaning the back hallway, I decided to scrub the smoke stains off the wall near the furnace. That's when I noticed it. A small carving, not from fire, but etched into the plaster, the crest from my father's ring. Half the symbol was chipped, but I recognized it. An oak tree split by lightning. Behind the panel was a small cavity. Inside, wrapped in waxed linen and bound with twine, was a metal container the size of a shoebox. I didn't hesitate. I pried it open on the kitchen table. Inside were legal documents I hadn't seen before. Letters, a deed, a medical directive, all in his handwriting. But tucked beneath it all was a cassette tape. On the label, written in black ink, "For when they come for her." I reached for the cassette player I'd used to listen to his first recording. As I clicked it open and fed in the tape, something outside caught my attention. The front door handle. It jiggled once, slow and deliberate. And then again. I hadn't slept since the jiggling door handle the night before. But I wasn't groggy. I was alert in that strange, unnerving way. Like your body forgets it needs rest when survival kicks in. I spent the early morning sealing the metal container and the cassette inside a fireproof safe. Just in case. By 9 a.m., I was in the kitchen rereading Callan's notes when the doorbell rang. I opened the door expecting a delivery or maybe a patrol car for follow-up. Instead, Valora stood there, sunglasses on, no makeup, designer coat open like she wasn't planning on staying long. "Let's talk like grown-ups," she said, stepping in without invitation. "No lawyers, no threats, just sisters." I didn't move. "You broke into my house last night," she smiled. "Don't be dramatic," I knocked. Then jiggled the handle like a burglar. I was trying to get your attention. Congratulations, you have it. She stepped into the living room, glanced around at the documents strewn across the table. Her eyes landed on a folder I hadn't yet closed. Her mouth curled into that smile I'd hated since childhood, the one that meant she thought she was still holding all the cards. I'll make it simple, she said. You walk away from this. No lawsuits, no court dates. You get $300,000, tax-free. You move on, live in some sweet little cabin in Oregon, and do yoga, or whatever it is you think peace looks like. I didn't blink. You still think this is about the money? It always is, she replied, dropping her purse onto the couch. You're just late to the game. I walked past her and stood by the fireplace, arms crossed. You don't get it. You think I want back in. I don't. I just want you out of the parts you stole. Her voice dropped to a whisper. You're not built for this, Rowena. I was born to win. You were born to serve. That did it. I didn't yell. I didn't throw anything. I opened the front door and said, Then go serve the exit, because you're done here. She stared at me for a second. Then she laughed, tight and bitter, and walked out like she was choosing to leave on her own terms. By noon, I was at Callan's office. His paralegal, Nikki, handed us a fresh batch of bank records. Most of it was dry, but one document stopped me cold. It was a notarized authorization form for a business account under my name. Date stamped. E-signed. I never opened this, I said. I didn't even live in Illinois that year. Callan was already on the phone with an IT friend who owed him a favor. 2 hours later, we had the IP address. Valora's former assistant. The same guy who once joked at Thanksgiving, signatures are just fonts with flair. They used me on paper when it suited them, and deleted me when I stopped cooperating. But it wasn't just that one account. Callan laid it all out. Valora had used my identity to funnel tax exemptions and redirect profits from the family trust under an LLC she created years ago. Every time I thought I was being excluded, I was actually being used. I wasn't invisible. I was hollowed out. They didn't cut me out, I muttered. They hollowed me out and wore my name like a mask. Callan nodded. This isn't just a lawsuit, it's federal. We spent the next 4 hours building timelines, linking signatures, compiling the voice memos. Darla had agreed to testify. She'd kept everything. Her records were immaculate. Handwritten notes, timestamps, even the envelope Valora left with that hush money check inside. This isn't a battle anymore, I told Callan as we packed up the files. It's an exposure. As dusk settled in, I returned home. The house was quiet, not peaceful, quiet like a held breath. I spotted the envelope immediately, sealed, no return address, slid under the door like a threat dressed as a secret. Inside was a Polaroid photo. Me, as a child, standing in front of the estate. I was smiling, innocent, trusting. Drawn across my face in red marker were 4 words. You weren't supposed to come back. The courthouse doors were heavier than I remembered. Maybe it was the weight of what I carried that made them feel that way. Boxes of paper, flash drives, notarized truths, all wrapped in years of erasure. Callan walked ahead, briefcase in one hand, calm as ever. Darla trailed behind me, her steps slower, measured, like each one peeled back a layer of memory she'd spent decades trying to forget. Flashbulbs popped before we even reached the front desk. The media had finally caught wind. Not just a family dispute. They called it a scandal, a forged will, hidden documents, a daughter erased. The headlines were practically writing themselves. I didn't flinch. You only flinch when you're surprised. There's a difference between making noise, I whispered to Callan, and making history. Inside, the courtroom buzzed with that low-frequency hum of anticipation. Valora sat at the defendant's table, flanked by a lawyer who looked like he billed by the syllable. She didn't look at me. Didn't have to. Her presence was her message. You'll never be one of us again. The judge entered. Neutral, old school, sharp eyes that had seen too many family fights turn into lawsuits. Callan opened with precision. questioned the authenticity of Valora's version of the will. He handed the judge the notarized original I'd found behind the wall. Then, he played a clip from my father's voice recording, clearly stating, "I signed only one version. It's with Rowena." Valora's lawyer launched into his defense with flair, suggested mental instability, referred to long-standing emotional volatility on my part. I stayed silent. Then Darla took the stand. She didn't raise her voice, didn't need to. She stated facts, dates, times, conversations. Described the day Valora left a check on her kitchen table with a note, "Stay quiet for the good of the family." The courtroom leaned forward, but the real moment came when the back doors opened and Harlan Cade walked in. Valora's ex, her former accountant, the one who'd disappeared right after my father's funeral. He took the stand and didn't look at her once. "Under oath," he said, "Valora instructed me to backdate documents and use her sister's identity to secure tax benefits. We created an LLC using Rowena's name, bank account, signature, the works. She always said, 'No one checks the shadows.'" Valora's face drained. For once, she had nothing to say. When it was my turn, I didn't script anything. I stood, hands steady, voice clear. "I didn't come here to take from her," I said. "I came to take back what she thought I'd never fight for." I presented the voice recordings, the notarized will, and the timeline. I laid out the forged documents tied to the shell accounts. I ended with a sentence that came out like steel. "This wasn't betrayal, it was strategy. Cold, calculated." The judge didn't rule that day, said he needed time, but the courtroom knew what was coming. I felt it shift in the air, sympathy turning toward me, confusion turning toward her. Valora didn't wait. She stormed out the side exit, chased by a swarm of reporters. I didn't follow, didn't need to. Callan leaned in and said, "We just cracked the shell, now comes the storm." We walked out together, Darla behind us. As I stepped into the daylight, a man brushed past me, handed me a folded note, and disappeared into the crowd. Inside was a photo, me, standing at the witness stand, mouth mid-sentence. The picture had been taken from inside the courtroom, from a seat no one remembered being filled. On the back, written in blocky ink, "You're not done yet." The day after court, the house felt still in a way that wasn't peaceful, just empty. Even the air was too quiet. I didn't turn on the radio, didn't check the news. I just sat at the kitchen table, staring at a cup of coffee that had gone cold an hour before I remembered I'd made it. There was a knock on the door, not forceful, just enough to cut through the quiet. A delivery man held a package with no return label. I signed without speaking. Inside was a framed drawing from my niece, Valora's daughter. A family tree. Stick figures in different colors, each labeled carefully. Mom, Dad, Aunt Marla, Uncle Dean, Cousin Jack. No Rowena, not even a leaf. It wasn't just paperwork. It was generational amnesia. By late morning, Mom showed up unannounced. She never knocked loud, just tapped like she wasn't sure she had the right to be there. "May I come in?" she asked, as if I might slam the door in her face. I stepped aside. She sat down without waiting. "I saw the news," she said, voice gentle. "Maybe it's time to let this rest. For peace." I stood across from her, arms crossed. "Peace for who?" "Everyone," she answered too quickly. "Did you know?" I asked. "About Valora, the fake accounts, the forged documents." She looked down. "I didn't want to choose." "You did." Her eyes met mine. I stayed silent. "That's not the same." "No, it's worse." She didn't argue, just sighed like she'd aged 20 years in a day, then quietly let herself out. That silence was louder than any door slam. By midday, clips from the trial were trending. My name showed up in hashtags, my face in thumbnails. Some blogs called me brave. Others called me dangerous. One article wrote, "She didn't just fight for a will, she fought for her narrative." Then Valora struck back. She released an edited video montage, clips from old birthday parties, out-of-context conversations, one of me crying on a front porch years ago after a miscarriage I'd never told anyone about. She added voiceovers. She's always been erratic. We tried to protect her. My phone wouldn't stop ringing. Emails flooded in. My voicemail maxed out. Callan called and said, "You cracked her image. Now she's bleeding for control." That night, an old college friend messaged me. "I thought you were the one who went off the rails." I didn't know. The unraveling had been happening for years. Quiet, layered, subtle, missed birthdays, group chats I was never added to. Cousins told I didn't want to come when no one had invited me. They rewrote me while I was still alive. But I was done explaining. I didn't release a video, didn't hold a press conference. I posted one thing on my page. The truth doesn't need a PR team. It just needs daylight. Then I got to work. I reviewed depositions, timelines, evidence. I scheduled a media interview with a local reporter I trusted, not some national network looking for a scandal. At sunset, I was wrapping up a call with Callan when my phone lit up with another number, Mom. I hesitated, then picked up. "I think," she said slowly, "Valora knew your father was going to change the will, and she wasn't going to let that happen." There was silence. Then the line went dead. The ruling came on a Thursday morning. The judge didn't drag it out. No speeches, no drawn-out reasoning for the cameras. Just a statement, read clearly and without hesitation. The court finds the will submitted by Ms. Valora Dunn to be invalid. Fraud is established by preponderance of the evidence. The estate reverts to the previous, notarized version. My name was reinstated. The property returned. Valora was fined, publicly admonished, and her case was forwarded to the state attorney's office for further investigation. It wasn't revenge, it was restoration. And it came with silence. The kind that feels heavy, not peaceful. The kind that comes when no one is left to argue. The media didn't stay silent, though. By lunchtime, headlines flooded every platform. Heiress exposed in inheritance fraud. Designer unraveled by sister's will. One by one, Valora's clients dropped her. A luxury furniture sponsor posted a bland statement of contractual termination. A high-end real estate company she had designed for issued a public apology for not exercising better judgment. Then the footage leaked. Grainy video from a work meeting, Valora sipping wine and mimicking our father's speech after his stroke, laughing while her team joined in. It went viral in under an hour. The backlash came fast and vicious. Boycotts were organized. Her business rating plummeted. Her name, the very thing she thought would protect her, became a liability. Meanwhile, Callan laid everything out in front of me. "You can go full force," he said. "Seize all damages, shut her out permanently, even press civil charges." I looked at the stack of papers, the clean printouts, the folder labeled Final Filing, and I knew something he didn't have to say aloud. Valora was already out. Of influence, of power, of control. I kept the house, the rights, the name, but I transferred part of the estate, specifically the parcel my father had once hoped to turn into a clinic, into the hands of a nonprofit. A medical foundation named after him. The papers were signed and notarized that same week. When asked about it on record, I said simply, "I'm not here to take, I'm here to remember him right." A national talk show invited me to share my story. I went, not for publicity, but because someone had to explain how easy it is for truth to be rewritten in a family that values appearance over honesty. I wore no makeup, no stylist touched my hair. I spoke clearly, measured, and I never once said Valora's name. I wasn't erased by strangers, I said on air. I was erased by people who were supposed to protect me, but you don't get to decide who matters just because you have the louder voice. The host asked if I wanted reconciliation. "I don't need reconciliation," I answered. "I need boundaries." I ended with a line I hadn't rehearsed. "Your last name can't protect you from truth. It never has." The clip was replayed on morning news, shared by advocacy groups, quoted in columns. But I didn't read the comments. Didn't need to. 2 days later, I got a voice message from Valora. 6 seconds. You ruined me. I typed back a response. 5 words. You did that yourself, remember? She never replied. Neither did Mom. That evening, I walked through the house, the one they said I wasn't worthy of. It felt warmer now, less like a battleground, more like a legacy. I opened a kitchen drawer and felt resistance. One of the panels was misaligned. I reached behind and found a slim, leather-bound notebook, my father's handwriting all over the cover. I turned to the last page. It wasn't dated, just a single line. If she ever reads this, I hope she knows I was always waiting for her to remember who she was. It had been 2 weeks since the ruling, and I still hadn't touched the stack of mail piling up on the hallway table. Legal paperwork, utility bills, a few cards I assumed were pity in envelopes. I avoided them until that morning when the light coming through the kitchen window made everything feel less suffocating. Halfway through the stack, one envelope caught my eye. Not in its appearance, but in its name. Mrs. Elaine Weathers, my old neighbor from across the street when I was 10. Her handwriting looked the same, rounded and careful, like she thought someone was always watching. Inside was a card. No flowers, no fake gold foil, just a sentence written in blue ink. I always knew you were the one holding the weight in silence. I sat with that card in my lap for longer than I care to admit. It was strange how someone I hadn't spoken to in decades could sum up everything better than the people who saw me every day. Sometimes strangers see you clearer than blood. Later that afternoon, I stopped by the community center, the one built on the land my father wanted to turn into something meaningful. Now it was buzzing. Laughter. Volunteers in matching shirts. A mural going up on the west wall. It was alive. At the back of the garden, a simple plaque stood beneath a tree my father planted the year Valora got her first internship. In memory of Harold Shipley, advocate of quiet strength. I smiled. Not for ceremony, not for anyone watching. For the first time in too long, I smiled for peace. This was the legacy. Not the mansion, not the marble, not the press releases or the award dinners Valora used to drag him to and speak over him the entire night. It was this, a space where people felt seen. That evening, I got a call from Dean, my brother. We hadn't spoken since the deposition. He didn't start with small talk. I stayed quiet too long, he said. You didn't deserve what they did. There was a long pause between us. I'm not angry at you, I finally said, but I'm not pretending anymore either. I didn't know what to do. You could have done anything. You chose nothing. His voice cracked. I thought keeping peace was better than breaking truth. I ended the call with one sentence. It's not about what I deserved. It's about what I'll never tolerate again. The next morning, I walked a path near the river, just a few blocks from the community center. Kids rode their bikes. A woman I recognized from the court hearing nodded at me. Then a teenager, maybe 16, walked beside me for a stretch. You're the woman from TV, right? I gave a small nod. He hesitated, then asked, How do you know when it's time to stop fighting? I thought about that for a while. When the truth no longer needs defending, I said, just living. He nodded, like that made more sense than he'd expected. That night, I opened my desk drawer and pulled out the last of the legal files. I read each one carefully, then boxed them, labeled the top. Closed. Not as an act of finality, but of control. Not every scar needs to be seen to be real. I carried the box to the attic, slid it into a corner, and turned off the light. As I walked back down the stairs, I noticed something on the front step through the glass. A small velvet box. Inside was my father's ring, the one I remembered him wearing when he thought no one noticed. The one Valora said got lost in probate. Tucked underneath was a slip of paper, no signature. He said you'd wear it when you were ready. That morning, I put on the ring. His ring. It had lived most of its life on my father's left hand, worn thin along the edges from decades of use. It wasn't ornate, just silver, etched with the oak crest he once said reminded him of his own roots. I slipped it onto my finger, and it fit like it had waited for no one else. Not as a trophy, as a reminder. I bled to wear this. He once told me, "The loudest vengeance is silence paired with outcome." I hadn't understood that fully then. I do now. By mid-morning, the estate auction was already underway. The last pieces of Valora's curated empire, antique mirrors, imported rugs, framed press clippings of herself, were on display for strangers to claim. Each item sold was another chapter closed. I sat in the back, unnoticed by most. That suited me just fine. Valora spotted me, of course. She stood on the far side of the room, flanked by a tight-lipped attorney and an assistant who looked like she'd rather be anywhere else. Valora didn't say a word, just stared. No tears, no outbursts, just cold fury boiling behind her eyes. I nodded once, not out of gloat, but out of finality. She looked away. Halfway through the auction, she left the room. I followed. Outside, the cold air hit like a second breath. She turned, arms crossed, and said, "You think you won? You lost everything. You're alone. You burned the whole house down to prove a point." I stepped closer, handed her a sealed envelope. She snatched it, eyes narrowed. "What is this?" "A page from Dad's journal," I said. "He wrote it after your last meeting. He knew what you were planning. You were never the daughter he feared. Just the one who stopped listening." She opened the envelope. Her lips trembled, but she said nothing. And for the first time since this began, I saw something behind her anger. The faint, bitter taste of loss. I didn't wait for her to speak. Some silences don't deserve to be broken. The following afternoon, I hosted a small gathering at the community center. The parcel of land my father once envisioned as a clinic was now alive with energy. Kids running through grass, volunteers setting up a garden plot, neighbors bringing boxes of books for a pop-up library. I stood before them, simple and quiet. "You don't have to win louder," I said. "You just have to win last." At the far end of the field, a brick wall bore a simple inscription. Harold Shipley, builder, father, listener. A reporter approached me near the refreshment table. "Ms. Shipley, would you like to make a comment about the family legacy?" I shook my head gently. "It's not my story anymore. It's theirs now." That evening, I returned home. The house no longer felt haunted. It felt earned. I went to the river one last time, the letter in hand, the final one. His handwriting faded with time, but not with weight. I folded it carefully into a paper boat, struck a match, and let the flame lick its corners as the current carried it away. Watching it drift, I whispered, "I wasn't your last choice. I was the one you knew would finish what you couldn't." As I turned to leave, my phone buzzed. Subject line, Inheritance Dispute, Mercer County Estate. Sender, a name I didn't recognize. I read the message once, twice, then exhaled slowly. Looks like the silence left a few echoes.